In the winter of 1891, the Ashcroft Hotel became a tomb disguised as a sanctuary. Before we venture into this bone-chilling tale from the frozen heart of Vermont, tell us, where are you listening from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're ready to dig into history's darkest secrets with us, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell. Trust me, you do not want to miss what unfolded inside those walls. Now, let's travel back to a place where warmth was a lie and hospitality masked something unspeakable. The winter of 1891 came down on Vermont like a curse hurled from the heavens. By mid-December, the roads were smothered under 3 feet of snow, and the wind screamed through the pine forests with a voice that sounded almost human. Ridgefield, a tiny town tucked into the northern mountains, had become a world unto itself, cut off from the rest of civilization by a relentless storm that seemed to have no end. In that merciless season, the Ashcroft Hotel stood like a beacon of hope, built just 2 years earlier by a mysterious Boston investor named Cornelius Ashcroft. The 3-story structure rose from the landscape like a cathedral of wood and stone. Its architecture screamed Victorian, ornate trim, tall windows glowing amber against the dark, and a wraparound porch that promised shelter from the storm. The main entrance was flanked by 2 gas lamps that burned day and night, flames flickering behind frosted glass. Inside, a massive stone fireplace dominated the lobby, fed around the clock by invisible hands. The scent of burning cedar mingled with something else, something faintly medicinal that guests found oddly soothing, but could never quite place. Thomas Whitmore showed up at the Ashcroft on December 18, his stagecoach nearly overturned by the violent winds. He was a traveling salesman from Albany, his cases stuffed with patent medicines and tonics. His fingers were blue from the cold, his beard crusted with ice, and his will to survive had all but vanished by the time he stumbled through the hotel's heavy oak doors. "Thank God," he gasped, collapsing against the registration desk. "I thought I was going to freeze to death out there." The desk clerk was a gaunt man with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. His name was Frederick Hayes, though he rarely offered it. He simply smiled, a smile that never reached his eyes, and slid the leather-bound guest registry across the polished mahogany. "You're lucky to have found us, Mr. Whitmore," Frederick said softly, somehow already knowing his name though Thomas hadn't mentioned it. "The storm's been especially cruel this winter." Thomas was too drained to question how the clerk knew who he was. He signed the register with numb fingers, noticing only 3 other names on the page for that week. Strange, he thought, for a hotel this size in such a remote spot. Surely more travelers would have sought refuge here. "Room 207, Frederick announced, sliding an iron key across the desk. "Second floor, end of the eastern corridor. Dinner's at 7 in the dining room. I trust everything will meet your satisfaction." The way he stressed that last word sent a chill up Thomas's spine, but he chalked it up to exhaustion and the cold. He lugged his cases up the wide staircase, struck by how silent the hotel was. No voices, no footsteps, no creaking boards except his own. Wall sconces cast dancing shadows in the hallways, making the floral wallpaper seem to shift and writhe in ways that defied the stillness. Room 207 was bigger than he'd expected. Brass bed, writing desk, and a window overlooking the endless white valley below. He noticed the window was sealed shut, painted over multiple times as if to ensure it would never open. Odd, he thought, but probably to keep the cold out. That evening, he followed the smell of roasted meat and baked bread to the dining room. The space was elegant. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, fine china, but eerily empty, except for one other guest. A woman sat rigidly at a corner table, dark hair pulled so tight it stretched her features. She didn't glance up when Thomas entered, didn't acknowledge his presence at all. She just stared at her untouched plate, hands folded in her lap. "Good evening," Thomas offered, taking a seat near the fireplace. She didn't respond. It was as though she hadn't heard him, or perhaps as if he didn't exist. A server emerged from the kitchen, another pale, gaunt figure with that same hollow look in his eyes. He placed a plate before Thomas without a word. Venison, potatoes, green beans. The food was hot and well prepared but oddly tasteless. Thomas ate mechanically, feeling the weight of the woman's silence pressing against the room like a physical presence. "Excuse me," he called to the server. "How long has that woman been a guest here?" The server paused, expression blank. "I'm not allowed to discuss other guests, sir. Is there anything else you need?" No, thank you." After dinner, Thomas went back to his room. Exhaustion pulled him towards sleep, despite the unease coiling in his chest. He didn't notice the small detail that would haunt him later. The registry downstairs now listed 4 names for the week. But when he'd signed in, there'd been only 3. Yet he'd encountered only one other guest. As he drifted off, the wind outside grew fiercer, rattling the sealed window. And somewhere deep in the hotel, footsteps echoed through empty corridors. Measured, deliberate, moving ever closer to the occupied rooms. Thomas woke to absolute silence, the kind that felt unnatural and oppressive. The storm had stopped sometime during the night, but the lack of wind only made the hotel's stillness more pronounced. He checked his pocket watch, 6:47 a.m. gray. Weak morning light filtered through his sealed window, painting the room in shades of ash. He dressed quickly, his breath visible in the cold air despite the radiator that supposedly pumped heat. When he touched the metal surface, it was ice cold. Puzzled, he headed downstairs, hoping to ask about getting his room properly heated. The lobby was empty. No clerk at the desk, no guests milling about. No staff preparing for the day. The fire in the great hearth had burned down to embers, though no one appeared to tend it. Thomas approached the registration desk, intending to ring the service bell, when his eyes fell upon the open registry. His blood went cold. The page showed entries from the past month, names written in various hands and inks. But as Thomas scanned the columns, he noticed something deeply disturbing: dozens of check-in dates, but almost no corresponding check out dates. Guest after guest had signed in, some as recently as 3 days ago, but the departure column stayed blank. Page after page, the same pattern repeated. "Looking for something, Mr. Whitmore." Thomas spun to find Frederick Hayes standing behind him, seemingly out of nowhere. The clerk's smile was the same as before, pleasant, empty, vaguely menacing. I was just curious about the other guests," Thomas stammered. "I've barely seen anyone since I arrived. For a hotel this size, it's strange. We value privacy here." Frederick cut in smoothly. "Or guests appreciate discretion. Many come to the Ashcroft Hotel specifically for solitude. The isolation encourages reflection. But surely some of these people have families, businesses to get back to. Don't they eventually have to leave?" Frederick's smile widened slightly, though his eyes stayed flat and lifeless. "The Ashcroft Hotel has a way of making people feel at home, Mr. Whitmore. So much so that many extend their stays indefinitely. In some cases." The way he said, "indefinitely," turned Thomas's stomach. He wanted to press further, to demand answers about the registry's impossible pattern, but something in Frederick's gaze warned him not to. Instead, he nodded stiffly and retreated to the dining room for breakfast. The same woman from the night before was in the same corner seat, wearing the same dress, staring at the same untouched plate. Thomas approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, are you all right?" For the first time, she looked up. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused, like she was looking through him at something far away. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and hollow. "Don't eat the food." "I'm sorry." "The food," she repeated, her hands beginning to shake. "There's something in it. It makes you tired. Makes you stay." Thomas felt his pulse quicken. "What's your name?" "How long have you been here?" "Martha. Martha Henley. I came 3 weeks ago. Meant to stay 2 nights, but I can't seem to." Her voice trailed off, and her eyes glazed over again, returning to their vacant stare. Thomas backed away slowly, mind racing. He looked down at his own breakfast plate. Eggs, bacon, toast. And suddenly the memory of last night's tasteless dinner took on a sinister meaning. He left the food untouched and hurried back to his room, heart pounding. He had to leave immediately. But when he tried his door, the key wouldn't turn. The lock had somehow jammed or been altered. After several minutes of struggle, the door finally opened. But inside his room, something had changed. His cases had been moved, subtly repositioned, and on his bed lay a fresh set of clothes. Clothes he'd never seen before, but which were exactly his size. A note rested on top, written in elegant script. "Please join us for dinner at 7:00 p.m. Your presence is requested in the private dining room, 2nd floor, western corridor." Thomas crumpled the note, fear rising like bile in his throat. He went to the window, intending to break it if he had to, but the glass was impossibly thick, the paint sealing it reinforced by something beneath the surface. He struck it with a wooden chair. The chair splintered, the window stayed intact. He was trapped. That evening as 7 o'clock approached, Thomas heard footsteps in the hallway outside his room. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped right outside his door. A gentle knock followed. "Mr. Whitmore," came Frederick's voice, muffled by the wood. "Dinner is served. Please don't keep Mr. Ashcroft waiting." Thomas's breath caught. Cornelius Ashcroft, the hotel's mysterious owner, who supposedly lived in Boston, was here. Against every instinct, screaming at him to barricade the door, curiosity and a desperate hope for answers compelled Thomas to open it. Frederick stood in the hall, flanked by 2 other staff members Thomas had never seen before. All 3 wore the same vacant expression, the same hollow-eyed gaze. "This way, please," Frederick said, gesturing down the western corridor. Thomas followed, his mind cataloging every detail, searching for escape routes. The corridor seemed longer than it should be. The doors on either side were identical and silent. At the end stood a pair of double doors, ornately carved with patterns that seemed to writhe in the flickering gaslight. Frederick opened them. Inside, a long dining table stretched beneath a glittering chandelier. At the head sat a man impeccably dressed in a black suit. Someone Thomas instinctively knew was Cornelius Ashcroft himself. But it was the other seats that froze Thomas's blood. Every chair was occupied by a guest. Men and women of all ages dressed formally, sitting perfectly still with empty plates before them. Their eyes were open but unseeing, their faces slack, their bodies unnaturally rigid. They looked less like dinner guests and more like carefully posed mannequins. And among them, Thomas recognized faces from the registry downstairs, people who had checked in weeks or even months ago. "Welcome, Mr. Whitmore," Cornelius Ashcroft said, his voice smooth and cultured. "I do hope you'll stay for dinner. We have much to discuss regarding your extended residency at my establishment." Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, eyes darting from one catatonic guest to another. The chandelier above cast sharp shadows across their faces, making them appear almost skull-like in the dim light. Cornelius remained seated at the head of the table, fingers steepled beneath his chin, studying Thomas with the analytical gaze of a collector examining a new acquisition. "Please sit," Ashcroft said, gesturing to an empty chair midway down the table between a middle-aged man in a conductor's uniform and a young woman in a traveling dress. "There's no need for alarm. This is merely a dinner party." "A dinner party?" Thomas's voice came out strangled. "These people are... they're not even conscious. What have you done to them?" Ashcroft's expression didn't change. "I've given them something they couldn't find anywhere else in this cruel world. Permanent refuge, eternal shelter from the storms outside. Isn't that what everyone truly wants, Mr. Whitmore? A place where they never have to face the cold again." Thomas took a careful step backward. But Frederick and the other staff blocked his retreat, their bodies forming an impossible wall. He was trapped between the catatonic guests and the servants who'd become something less than human themselves. "Sit," Ashcroft repeated, his tone hardening. "I insist." With no other option, Thomas moved to the indicated chair and lowered himself onto it, muscles tense, ready to flee at the first opportunity. The woman beside him didn't blink, didn't visibly breathe. Up close, he could see her skin had a waxy quality, as if she were slowly transforming into something else. Ashcroft smiled, apparently pleased by Thomas's compliance. "You're wondering what's happening here. That's natural. You're more perceptive than most who arrive at my establishment. The woman in the dining room, Martha Henley, I believe she warned you, didn't she, about the food?" Thomas said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. "She was correct, of course," Ashcroft continued, lifting a crystal glass filled with dark red wine. "The meals here are prepared with certain additives, herbal extracts from plants that grow only in the deepest parts of these mountains. Indigenous peoples used them in sacred rituals centuries ago, before they were driven out. The compounds induce deep suggestibility, followed by lethargy and eventually a kind of waking coma." "Why?" Thomas managed. "Why do this?" Ashcroft's smile faded, replaced by something that might have been genuine emotion. Though whether it was sadness, anger, or something else, Thomas couldn't tell. "Prisoners? No, Mr. Whitmore. Residents. Permanent residents of the only place that will never abandon them, never turn them away. Do you know what this hotel really is? It's an ark, a sanctuary for those the world has forgotten or discarded." He stood, walking slowly along the length of the table, his hand trailing across the backs of the chairs. "This man, Mr. Donovan, was a train conductor who lost his family to scarlet fever. He came here with a rope in his bag, planning to end his life in some anonymous room. This woman, Miss Carpenter, was fleeing an abusive husband who'd already killed 2 wives before her. That gentleman at the far end, Dr. Reeves, was wanted for mercy killings at a Boston hospital. Every person here was running from something, seeking refuge from a world too harsh to endure. So you drugged them." Thomas shot back, turned them into living corpses. "I gave them peace," Ashcroft corrected coldly. "A place where the pain stops, where fear ends, where they can exist without suffering. The alternative for most was death, either by their own hand or at the hands of others. I simply offered a third option." Thomas's mind raced, trying to process the twisted logic. "And the staff? Frederick and the others? What happened to them?" "They were the first," Ashcroft admitted. "When I built this hotel, I hired locals from Ridgefield. But they started asking too many questions about guests who never left. So I offered them the same mercy I offer everyone else. Now they serve without complaint, without fear, without the burdens of consciousness that plague ordinary men. "You're insane," Thomas whispered. "Perhaps," Ashcroft conceded, "but I'm also providing a service. Every winter, when storms isolate this region, desperate people arrive at my door. I take them in, feed them, house them, and if they're truly broken, truly beyond hope, I offer them something the outside world never could, an end to suffering without the finality of death." He returned to his seat, eyes boring into Thomas. "The question now, Mr. Whitmore, is which category you fall into. Are you simply a traveler who will continue on his way once the snow melts? Or are you someone who might benefit from extended hospitality?" Thomas's hands gripped the chair arms. "I'm leaving tomorrow as soon as possible. Are you?" Ashcroft's smile returned, cold and knowing. "You've already eaten 2 meals here, Mr. Whitmore. The compounds are cumulative. By now, they're in your bloodstream, beginning their work. You've probably noticed the fatigue, the slight confusion, the way time seems to move differently here. That's just the beginning." Thomas felt panic rising. It was true. He did feel strange, thoughts clouded, reactions slower. There must be an antidote. Something to reverse it. "There is," Ashcroft said. "Fresh air, physical exertion, and time away from this place. The compounds metabolize slowly in isolation, but can be purged with effort. The question is whether you have the strength to make that effort, or whether you'll simply stay." He gestured to the guests. "Some resisted at first, like you. They tried to leave, tried to break free. But the compounds, the isolation, the comfort of a warm bed, and regular meals. Eventually, resistance becomes too difficult. It's easier to simply accept, to let go, to stay." Thomas pushed himself up, legs trembling. "I won't. I'll find a way out." "Perhaps," Ashcroft said, unconcerned. "The doors aren't locked, Mr. Whitmore. You're free to walk out into the snow at any time. Of course, the nearest town is 15 miles away through chest-deep drifts. The temperature tonight will drop to 20 below, and you haven't eaten proper food without additives in 2 days. Your strength is already compromised." He paused. "But please, make the attempt if you wish. I won't stop you. This has always been about choice. Some people choose to leave. Most choose to stay. Let's see which category you belong to." Thomas stumbled toward the door, vision beginning to blur at the edges. Frederick and the other staff stepped aside, letting him pass. Behind him, Cornelius Ashcroft's voice echoed through the hallway. "Your room will be waiting when you realize there's nowhere else to go. There's always a place for you here, at the Ashcroft, Mr. Whitmore. Always and forever." Thomas crashed through the hallway, hands scraping against the floral wallpaper, as he fought to keep his balance. His head felt heavy, thoughts sluggish and disjointed. How much of the compound was in his system? How much time before he ended up like the others? Hollow-eyed, vacant, trapped in a waking dream. He had to get out now. The main staircase seemed to stretch endlessly, steps multiplying in his distorted vision. He gripped the banister and forced himself downward, each movement a conscious effort. Behind him, he heard nothing, no footsteps, no voices. The hotel's silence was absolute, as if it were holding its breath, waiting to see what he'd do. The lobby materialized around him like a half-remembered dream. The fire in the great hearth had burned to nothing, leaving the space cold and shadowed. Thomas staggered to the main entrance. Fumbling with the heavy brass handle, it opened. Ashcroft hadn't lied. The doors weren't locked. The realization was somehow more terrifying than if they had been, because it meant the hotel's true prison wasn't physical. It was psychological, chemical, insidious. The night air hit him like a physical blow. The cold was absolute, searingly painful against exposed skin. Snow stretched in every direction, unmarked and pristine under a moonless sky. The world beyond the porch was an endless void of white and black, hostile and unknowable. Thomas stepped off the porch and immediately sank to his knees in snow. His thin clothing, packed for business travel rather than Arctic survival, offered almost no protection. The wind had picked up, cutting through fabric like it wasn't there, finding every inch of exposed skin and burning it with cold. He pushed forward anyway, driven by terror and determination. 15 miles to Ridgefield. He could make it. He had to. But with each step, his strength waned. The compounds in his system, combined with 2 days of inadequate nutrition and sheer physical exhaustion, began to take their toll. His legs trembled. His lungs burned with each breath of frozen air, and his thoughts grew increasingly fragmented. After what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, he looked back at the hotel. It stood behind him, glowing warmly, windows lit like beacons promising safety and shelter. He'd barely covered 100 yards. The building seemed to watch him, patient and eternal, certain he'd return. "No," he gasped aloud, voice lost in the wind. "I won't go back." He forced himself forward again, but his body was shutting down, redirecting resources from his extremities to protect his core. His fingers had gone numb. His toes no longer sent signals to his brain. The cold wasn't painful anymore. It was becoming a kind of numbness, a creeping anesthesia that made the idea of simply lying down in the snow almost appealing. That's when he saw it. A light in the distance, flickering through the trees. Not the hotel behind him, but something ahead. A building. A cabin. Hope surged, giving him a final burst of energy. He angled toward the light, movements desperate and uncontrolled. But as he drew closer, hope curdled into horror. It wasn't a cabin. It was a small shed, half buried in snow, lit by a lantern on a post. And around the shed, visible even through the falling snow, were shapes, human shapes. Bodies. Thomas fell to his knees, crawling the final distance. The corpses were frozen solid, preserved by the brutal cold, arranged in neat rows like cordwood. Some were clearly from decades past, their clothing old-fashioned even for 1891. Others were more recent, their faces still detailed enough for Thomas to recognize several from the hotel registry. These were the ones who had tried to leave. The ones who'd made it further than the front porch, but not far enough to survive. The ones who'd chosen death in the snow over life in Ashcroft Hotel. Mercy. A metal plaque was mounted on the shed's wall. Thomas crawled close enough to read it by lantern light. The Ashcroft Memorial Garden. These souls rest in eternal peace, having found their final refuge. The twisted benevolence of it, that Ashcroft had collected and preserved even those who'd rejected his hospitality, made Thomas's stomach heave. He vomited into the snow, purging what little he had left. He was going to die out here. He could feel it now, his core temperature dropping, consciousness flickering like a candle in wind. The compound in his system made it harder to fight, harder to care. Part of him wanted to close his eyes and let the cold take him. At least then he wouldn't become one of Ashcroft's permanent residents. Another vacant-eyed prisoner at the eternal dinner table. But then he heard something, a sound that didn't belong to wind or night. Voices. Human voices calling out. "Over here. I see someone." Light pierced the darkness. Torches, multiple torches carried by multiple people. "It's another one. He's still alive." Rough hands grabbed Thomas, lifting him from the snow. His vision swam, but he could make out faces. Real faces with genuine concern, fear, humanity in them. Not the hollow masks of Ashcroft's servants. "We've got you," a gruff voice said. "Hang on. We'll get you to town." The hotel. Thomas managed to gasp. People trapped. drugged. We know. The voice replied grimly. We know. As consciousness faded, Thomas felt himself being carried away from the shed, away from the hotel's glowing windows, toward safety. His last thought before darkness claimed him was a question. How did they know to find him? How did they know about the hotel? And in the distance, barely visible through the snow, he saw a figure standing on the Ashcroft's porch, watching the rescue party disappear into the night. Even from that distance, Thomas recognized the silhouette of Cornelius Ashcroft. Patient and untroubled, knowing that for everyone who escaped, a dozen more would come seeking refuge from the storm. Thomas woke to warmth and light. For a terrifying moment, he thought he was back in the hotel, that his escape had been a fever dream, and he'd simply collapsed in the hallway, only to be carried back to his room by Frederick's cold hands. But the smell was different. Wood smoke and coffee instead of that strange medicinal scent. And the sounds were different too. Genuine conversation. A naturally crackling fire, footsteps with weight and purpose. He opened his eyes to find himself in a small cabin. Lying on a cot near a pot-bellied stove, 3 men sat at a rough-hewn table nearby, speaking in low voices. When they noticed Thomas stirring, one of them, a bearded man in his 50s with a weathered face, approached. Easy now, the man said, voice gruff. You took in a lot of cold. Lucky we found you when we did. Another hour and you'd be frozen like the others. Who are you? Thomas croaked, throat raw. Thomas Whitmore. Name Samuel Barrett, Sheriff of Ridgefield. These are my deputies, Jacob and William. We've been watching the Ashcroft Hotel for 3 months now, ever since people started disappearing. Thomas struggled to sit up. Samuel helped him, propping pillows behind his back. Disappearing. Then you know what's happening there. You know about Ashcroft. Samuel's expression darkened. We know some, not all. Getting information about that place is like grabbing smoke. People check in and don't check out. Those who do manage to leave are usually half mad or too traumatized to speak, and we can't just storm the place without cause. Without cause. Thomas's voice rose in disbelief. There are people being held there, drugged, turned into living corpses. We know. Jacob interjected from the table, his younger face tight with frustration. But Ashcroft is careful. Technically, everyone stays voluntarily. He doesn't kidnap or force anyone at gunpoint. They walk through his doors of their own free will, and if they're drugged with something that doesn't kill them or leave obvious marks, none. We have no legal grounds. Samuel finished bitterly. We've contacted authorities in Montpelier and even Boston. There's no record of Cornelius Ashcroft existing before 1889. No birth certificate. No business records, no property deeds beyond the hotel itself. It's as if he materialized out of nothing 2 years ago, with enough money and chemistry knowledge to build that place. Thomas's mind reeled. The bodies, the shed. I saw at least 20 corpses. 37, William said quietly. We've counted. We check every week. And the number keeps growing. But even that doesn't give us legal standing. They all died of exposure. People who tried to leave during storms and didn't make it. Ashcroft could argue he tried to stop them, tried to keep them safe, and they left against his advice. That's insane, Thomas protested. That's the law. Samuel replied, sitting heavily beside the cot, or at least the letter of it. But we're not giving up. We've been documenting everything, building a case. Your testimony will help. If we can prove Ashcroft is deliberately drugging guests with intent to hold them against their will, we might get the state attorney general involved. Thomas nodded. Then a thought struck him. How did you find me? How did you know I was there? Samuel exchanged glances with his deputies before answering. "We've set up observation points in the woods. When we saw you leave and head toward the memorial shed, we knew you'd need help. We've lost people before. People who tried to escape but didn't understand how far they'd have to go or how depleted their bodies were. We were too late for 6 others," Jacob added, voice heavy with guilt. "You're the second one we've managed to save. The first was a young woman named Charlotte Pierce. She's recovering in town. But her mind, she's not the same. Something about that hotel broke something inside her." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Martha Henley. There's a woman in the hotel who warned me about the food. She's been there for 3 weeks. If there's any chance, we'll add her to the list," Samuel promised. "But Thomas, you need to understand. We can't raid that hotel. Not yet. Not without more evidence, more testimony, more political will from people with power. Right now, all we can do is watch, document, and try to save those who manage to escape." "And meanwhile, how many more check in?" Thomas demanded. "How many more seek shelter there and never leave? This has to stop." "It will," Samuel said firmly. "But it has to be done right. If we go in half-cocked and the legal system throws out the case, Ashcroft walks free and sets up somewhere else. We need a case so airtight that even the most corrupt judge couldn't dismiss it." Over the next 3 days, Thomas recovered in the cabin, giving detailed testimony about everything he'd witnessed. Samuel wrote it all down, adding it to a growing file of evidence. During that time, Thomas learned more about the investigation. The Ashcroft Hotel had opened in March 1889, the tail end of that year's winter. From the start, locals found something unsettling about it, though they couldn't articulate what. Cornelius Ashcroft kept to himself, rarely came to town, and hired staff through newspaper ads rather than local recruitment. The first disappearance, a traveling salesman named Robert Morrison, occurred in November 1889. His brother filed a missing person report, saying Robert had sent a letter about arriving at the Ashcroft but hadn't been heard from since. "We investigated," Samuel explained. "Ashcroft showed us the registry. Morrison had checked in and checked out 3 days later. He even produced a signed receipt. There was nothing we could do." But the disappearances continued. By winter 1890, 8 people had vanished after staying at the hotel. Some had families who reported them missing. Others had nobody to notice. The pattern only became clear in retrospect. All the missing people had last been seen heading toward or staying at the Ashcroft. That's when we started watching. And that's when we found the memorial shed and the bodies. We wanted to confront Ashcroft then, but the state authorities told us to wait. To build a more comprehensive case. They're worried about jurisdiction issues, about Ashcroft having political connections we don't know about. So people keep dying while bureaucrats deliberate," Thomas said bitterly.
"Yes,"
Samuel admitted, face anguished. "And it eats at us every day. But if we act rashly and fail, we might never get another chance to stop him." On the 4th day, Thomas was strong enough to travel. Samuel arranged a coach to Burlington, where he could catch a train back to Albany. Before he left, the sheriff gave him a final warning. "Ashcroft knows your face now. If you ever come back to this part of Vermont, be careful. We don't know the full extent of his connections or resources. Some of my contacts suggest he might not be working alone, that there might be others like him operating similar establishments elsewhere." The implication made Thomas's blood run cold. "You think there are more places like the Ashcroft?" "I think," Samuel said carefully, "that what we're dealing with is more organized than one madman with knowledge of herbal compounds. But I can't prove it. Not yet. Thomas left Ridgefield with a promise to testify when called upon, to help bring Ashcroft to justice, no matter how long it took. But as his coach carried him away from those mountains, away from the hotel that still glowed in the darkness like a predator's eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd only glimpsed the edge of something far larger and more terrible. Months later, in April 1892, Thomas received a telegram from Samuel Barrett. Brief: hotel closed, building empty, Ashcroft gone, all evidence removed, case suspended. Thomas never returned to Vermont. He moved to California, changed his name, and spent the rest of his life trying to forget the Ashcroft Hotel. But sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, he'd wake from dreams of endless hallways and vacant eyes, of a dinner table filled with the living dead, and of a voice promising eternal refuge from the storm. The Ashcroft Hotel stood empty for 7 years before a fire destroyed it in 1899. The memorial shed and its contents vanished sometime during that period, removed by persons unknown. No official investigation into the hotel's activities was ever completed. Cornelius Ashcroft was never found, never charged, never held accountable. But in the decades that followed, similar stories emerged from isolated regions across America. Hotels, boarding houses, inns where travelers checked in during harsh winters and were never seen again. Places where the promise of shelter hid something darker, where hospitality was a mask for something unspeakable. The Ashcroft Hotel was closed, but its legacy lingered, and somewhere, perhaps, Cornelius Ashcroft continued his work, offering permanent refuge to those desperate enough to accept it. Building his collection of permanent residents, one vanished soul at a time, Thomas Whitmore took his knowledge to the grave in 1931, never speaking of that winter again, except once, in a delirious fever at the end of his life, when he whispered to his daughter, "Never stay at a hotel that's too welcoming. Never trust shelter that feels too much like home, because some places don't want you to leave. They want you to stay, forever and always." The Ashcroft Hotel is gone, but the mountains of Vermont remain. And in those mountains, on the coldest winter nights, travelers sometimes see lights in the distance. Warm, welcoming lights that promise safety from the storm. And some of those travelers, desperate and frozen with nowhere else to go, follow those lights into the darkness. They check in, but they never check out. If this story sent chills down your spine, imagine what else we have in store. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because history's darkest corners are waiting to be explored, and you won't want to miss a single shadow. Drop a comment and tell us, would you have tried to escape the Ashcroft, or would the promise of warmth and shelter have been too tempting to resist? See you in the next story, if you dare.